Call Synod to order, please. We welcome Nate to say an opening prayer here this morning. Our opening worship is a little different today. We will be having a more extended time of worship to conclude our Synod session, whenever that happens today. Okay? So Nate, we welcome you to say the opening prayer.
Thank you. Will you pray with me? Our good and gracious God, we thank you for welcoming us again here this morning. Father, we know in your word that a day is like 1,000 years, and yet sometimes here at Synod, 3 minutes feels like an hour and a half. We know that we're in the final stretch, God, and so we ask that you would be with us. We ask that you would give us strength, courage to speak, peace in our minds, brevity with our words. We ask that you would give us hope. God, we know that in your word, we hear that the simple confession that Jesus is the Christ. And upon that confession, you will build your church. You will build your church. And so in all that we do and all that we discuss, we hope that our confession rings true. So that all we discuss, all we decide, and sometimes in spite of what we discuss and decide, your church will be built. That our Christ will build your church here in the CRCNA and beyond. May it be so with us. Amen.
Thank you, Nate. We'll talk briefly here with regard to order of the day. It's our intention to return to the discussion of Advisory Committee 9C. That will be followed by 4B and then 9D. A couple of additional announcements. Following our break this morning at 10:05, the officers have ruled that we will go into a brief executive session. So following the break at 10:05, we will be in a brief executive session. Also, with regard to the bivocational task force that has been recommended by Synod, Synod is looking for names for that task force. It did not get recommitted back to Advisory Committee 3. That was probably remiss of us. We ought to have sent that back to them for names. There is a procedure, however, that if it can't be completed here at Synod, in conjunction with the chair and the reporter of that committee and the officers of Synod and the executive director, that needs to be completed within 2 weeks of Synod. That's in our rules of procedure. But we want to give you an opportunity to have your input and to provide names for that bivocational task force. The chair of the committee is Tom Wolters, and the reporter is Jerry Koning. So if you have names for that committee, please slip those names to them. And it would be helpful if you, in addition to the name, would provide any other contact information and just a brief description of why you think that person would be qualified for that position. So if you could give that information to the chair and reporter of Advisory Committee 3, to Tom Wolters or Jerry Koning, that would be much appreciated. We're going to return now to our discussion of 9C, and so, roll call. Have you got them all?
No, we're still missing 25.
Oh.
And also, if somebody found this phone in the dining area, if nobody claims it, we can start auctioning it. Okay. All right. Yes. We still have 23 missing. 16. Actually need 7 more. I'm going to have to rattle off some names here. Peter Kornilov. He is here. Mark Van Andel. Oh, he's already gone. Mary Kalmink. Mary is here. Jason Siemens. Sherry Tenclay. Philip Vanderwint. Pete DeDrew. All right, roll call is complete. We are going to continue on and move on to our next item. And we are looking at recommendation 3B. Report 9C.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Returning to our report from last night, we are on section 3B, and I've been informed by the task force that they would like to take precedence, so I am ceding to them.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From the outset, I think we'd like to note one change that has to be implemented in the recommendation due to a previous decision that was taken. The Synod Review Task Force envisioned that we could perhaps do with 3 officers rather than 4. Synod has already declined to move in that direction and wishes to retain the status quo of 4 officers. And so under A, it ought to read 4 new officers rather than 3. So I'd like to read the recommendation and then have a conversation with regard to the merits that we see in this. And as we read through this, please keep in mind that this recommendation is based on a careful evaluation of the various delegate evaluation forms that were submitted in previous synods, the area of the election of officers, and the procedure of synod pertinent to that was one of the frequently commented on areas in previous evaluations. And so we did a detailed scrutiny of those evaluations. This is our recommendation, Mr. Chairman, that Synod create a process to begin in 2020 of selecting at the end of each Synod year a president, a vice-all, and a clerk to serve the following Synod with the following provisions. That would now actually say each year a president, vice president, clerk, and second clerk. So that would be retaining the language of what is presently the status quo. A, 4 new officers would be selected each year for the following synod. A president pro tem would no longer be required at synod. In order to encourage diversity of gender, ethnicity, and nationality at each synod and over time, a ranked choice voting process would not be used. The process of surveying synodical delegates regarding availability and willingness to serve as officers would continue to be used. Officers chosen for the next synod would come to that synod as part of their class's delegation. If an elected officer of Synod moved from one classis to another in the intervening year, that person would be part of the delegation of his or her new classis. If the term of an elder or deacon chosen to be an officer of Synod is due to expire before the next Synod, that office bearer's term would be extended to ensure service at the next Synod. Local duties and responsibilities as an office bearer would be determined by the local council. In the year leading up to the Synod at which the officers would serve, they would function as the program committee of Synod, which makes plans and assignments and provides advice for staff for the upcoming Synod. Attend Council of Delegate meetings for informational purposes and with an advisory voice, but not as voting delegates. We have an Appendix D for a cost estimate. Participate in training related to synodical governance and procedures provided by the CRC's executive director and parliamentarian. As you'll note, we've already approved the election or appointment of a parliamentarian, and in the mandate that was approved for that was included the provision that they would provide training for the officers prior to Synod. That kind of implies that we would know prior to Synod who those officers would be. In the event that the president-elect or clerk-elect is unable to serve at the next Synod, the vice-all would take his or her place. That language now changes to simply revert again to the status quo. If the president is not able to serve, the vice president then would move into that position, and a new vice president could be elected. The grounds, this plan would result in more experienced officers at Synod, enabling them to be prepared to lead well the following year. This manner of election allows for an alternate to either the president or the clerk. That was the original intention. The election now, as it would be with 4 officers, would still allow for that backup. The current problem of advisory committee chairpersons and reporters being removed from committees because of Synod officer elections would be eliminated. Sounds almost prophetic, doesn't it? D, this plan would allow time for mentoring and training of officers on procedural skills and/or content knowledge. That's our recommendation with the grounds that are there.
Okay, we have several people on the queue. Please make your way to the microphones. Doug Fakema, Nathaniel Voss, Daniel Minema, Michael Vanderlaan.
Doug Fakema, Pacific Northwest. I love the idea of streamlining our election of officers. My concern and the reason I would vote against this is because I believe this would make it much more difficult for an elder or deacon from Pacific Northwest, someplace a long ways away, to serve as an officer. The idea of 3 COD meetings, having to come back during the course of the year, I believe would make it more difficult for one of those people to commit to a position like that.
Nathan Voss, Classes Alberta North, speaking against the motion. We had a great deal of discussion about this provision at the advisory committee meeting as well, and it was our determination that this is a lot of change to the way that churches and classes handle their office bearers for something that is not really broken. So I appreciate the level of thought that went into working these provisions out. I think that the task force did a nice idea. But at the end of the day, we considered that having to try to figure out how office bearers would be moved between classes and requiring classes to renominate their office bearers just for the provision of Synod was a step too far.
Daniel Minema, Michael Vanderlaan, and John Teneinhouse.
Dan Minema, Classes Eastern Canada. speak against the motion. Yesterday, when we were talking about requiring classes to send minority delegates or a female delegate, we voted it down, and the grounds that were given from the floor about why they were against it was because Synod should not be telling classes who they should delegate. Classes delegate on their own. This takes that away again, and it makes it the same thing that you're saying that who's going to be our delegate. And if we can't pass that one yesterday, there's no way we can pass this one today, because it's the same thing. You can't tell the classes who to delegate.
Michael Vanderlaan.
Mike Vanderlaan, BC Southeast. Speaking against this motion, we should not have the executive also be the program committee for the same synod. That is a conflict of interest. It allows a lot of control in that group of people to stack the cards exactly the way they want it to get the outcomes that they want.
John Teneinhuis, Michael Wiersma, Kevin Van de Streek.
John, tonight has some classes, Toronto. Along with what's already been said, it goes against our whole reformational church polity, which is that the synod is a servant of the church's congregation, classes, synod. This turns it upside down. The synod then controls and rules in a way that is insensitive to that whole reformational understanding of how church polity functions to honor the local church and then the local classes.
Michael Wiersma, Classis Lake Superior, and I speak against this motion. Initially, reading this, I was for it, but because I saw the better efficiencies. However, a simple Google search in just the United States will show that $3.4 billion was spent on lobbying in last year alone, and I think this opens up the president-elect to both lobbying from within the denomination and also outside political groups. That number for lobbying is only going to skyrocket next year in election year, and I don't think we should open ourselves up to that.
Kevin Van de Streek, Tyler Wagenmaker, Brady Mulder.
Casey Van de Streek, Classes Hudson. Mr. Chairman, there are a number of grounds for why our advisory committee decided against this. I'm wondering if we can table this so that we could take a look at those grounds rather than me sharing them with you right now.
Yes.
Before you do that, I'd like to be able to respond. There have been quite a number of speakers, and I've patiently sort of allowed them to accumulate before responding to each one, but I would like to allow an opportunity for response. Mr. Chair, I think Shakespeare, in one of his finest moments, said, "Methinks thou dost protest too much." The suggestion that this would take the election of delegates away from the classes, give it to Synod, is simply not correct. We have, 190 delegates? We would be talking about 4 of those delegates. This doesn't apply to every classes in a given year. At most, it applies to 4 classes. The people that would be eligible to be elected would have already been elected by their classes to come to Synod. The idea that in that interim period, perchance 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 might go to another classes could happen. It's an eventuality. And so to dot the I's and cross the T's, this provision is in there so that we don't say, now what if, in chance that might happen? Ordinarily it wouldn't. Occasionally it might happen. But our office bearers aren't moving from classes to classes all the time, especially not the elders and deacons. Our pastors occasionally do, but even then they often accept a call within their same classes. Methinks thou dost protest too much. In terms of stacking the committees, Mr. Chair, I don't believe that the delegates of Synod are that manipulated. Playfully, one of our delegates talked about the chessboard. Our delegates are not pawns that are going to be moved from advisory committee to advisory committee by people that had the confidence of the previous synod to elect them into the positions of president, vice president, clerk, and second clerk. People will be put in those positions because they're trusted. They'll be put in those positions because they've demonstrated leadership, not because they are anticipated to be manipulators to move pawns on a chessboard. We elect our officers with the intent that Synod can excel. We say it's not broken. That's a compliment. That's wonderful. We succeed as a Synod. I think we usually do quite well as a Synod. But we're also put on display to the world, and sometimes the way that we function looks a bit messy. And sometimes we struggle through things. And having more training and being able to be better prepared gives us an opportunity to excel even when we're on prime time. Thank you.
There is a motion. Yes, go ahead.
It's a really scary thing to allow yourself to be nominated as an officer for this synod, any synod, because you don't know until the morning of Friday morning whether or not you're going to be elected. It's a very scary thing. It's because you don't know if you have the experience, you know you don't have the training. One of the reasons we are proposing this is because we want more people to think about the fact that they could be sitting up here leading Synod. It's far different to think of yourself being elected an officer, knowing that you've got a year to prepare, a year to be trained, and you can approach those chairs with confidence. One of the results, I think, consequences if we pass this motion, is that we will see different faces up at that table, and that's a good thing for this denomination.
There is a motion to table. Is there support? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Aye. Okay, tabling does not carry. We have Tyler Wagonmaker, Brady Mulder, Andrew Hansen on the queue.
I'd call the question, Mr. Chairman.
All right, the question has been called. We are ready to vote. We have a number of... We have to vote on calling the question. Okay. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay. Now, okay. Andrew Hansen, Ken Rosenbaum, Kevin Vandestreek.
I appreciate everything you all just said, but I'm going to protest just a little bit more. I think we need to really be thinking about the principles that are involved here instead of the numbers. Yes, agreed, it is a very small number of people we're talking about, but there's a principle that we're addressing for those of us that are opposed to this, which was already stated by several people. Secondly, I think the efficiencies of training are worthwhile and important, but it seems to me when I registered to be a delegate to Synod that I said I was willing or not willing to be an officer. And it seems to me that if we want people to be trained, then all of those that say, yes, I would love to be an officer, or I'm willing to be an officer, should be able to receive that training. And it seems to me that the training would come by web, that's my guess, and anybody that wants to take that training can take that training. Kathy's shaking her head, so maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me that if we have 10 people that are willing, we only elect 4, but if all 10 of those people get the training, that's a plus. That's a good thing for Synod. Thank you.
Ken Rosenbaum.
Ken Rosenbaum, Central Plains. I'd like a little clarity on provision B If maybe we could scroll up to provision B would be helpful for the body. My question has to do with, well, it doesn't seem to be the same B I was looking at. The provision that in the pursuit of ethnic diversity, it said a ranked choice voting process would not be used. I would like to have that explained for the benefit of the body, please.
Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to give a stab at that. The Synod Review Task Force, as it envisioned possible hypothetical ways of doing this, entertained as one option, and that's included in the body of the report from the Synod Review Task Force, the option of a ranked voting system. Put quite simply, what that would mean is that each delegate would vote their first, second, and third choice. And then the tabulation would be made in terms of those who have the highest number of points based not only on one vote from a delegate, but on a ranked vote. That might mean that out of a slate of 10, the bottom 5 would drop out, and there would be a second vote, again, ranked choice. Those who had voted for delegates in the bottom 5 would reallocate their votes to those who would be still on the ballot. That's the process of a ranked choice voting. Synod Review Task Force considered that and suggested not to do that. So this isn't really a motion that would change something. In fact, it would sort of maintain the status quo. In that sense, perhaps it's a moot point here, but Mr. Chair, it's simply included here to indicate to the body that that was entertained and is not being rejected as a potential option. And it's part of that package in terms of understanding how we would come to the makeup of the body in that election procedure.
Kevin Van de Streek, Willem Delleman, Gerald Koenig.
Casey Van Street, Classes Hudson. I speak against this. Maybe it's just because I'm from Jersey. We know a little something about creating new positions, and it's going to work out great, and we'll all be okay. I speak against this for a couple of reasons. We've already agreed as a synod for there to be more training going forward. And if you are someone that you feel as God has called you, you have the skills and abilities that you might be up there, I can only imagine how frightening that is on Friday, but I would also imagine that you have the skills and abilities to do it, and that you would take it upon yourself to read the material beforehand and begin to train yourself and ask for questions and help and reflection of those who've done it before you so that you can be better prepared for that. I still stand and say that this is a step too far that we as a synod would elect and take place. I don't think we protest too much. I think that's actually right, that we're in the right place there. The problem of moving delegates, it seems to me that this is exactly why we've set this up. We set up alternate chairs, we set up reporters, we set up folks so that if folks are moved to that table, we're good to go in the background, and it has served us well. We're talking about creating a position that for 6 days out of the year looks the same. And 51 weeks out of the year, it is something new that comes with a lot of responsibilities, something additional that's going on. And so I'd also like to quote William Shakespeare, who says, "Uneasy lies the head that wears the crown." Speak against this motion.
Mr. Chair, we heard earlier that the president would be the queen. And that's the person who wears the crown, and I don't understand why you would want to make uneasy that position.
Willem?
William Delleman, Classes BC Northwest. I am not as well versed on synodical. I don't even know how to say the words. I have sent in an amendment. I don't know if that's in order.
Okay, the amendment is out of order because it came in after the question had already been called.
Yeah, it takes forever to type these things. Okay, so then my question, or my statement, Mr. President, is there is much in this recommendation that I appreciate. I appreciate the transparency on member of the task force. That's why I haven't signed up to do this job that you're doing, because it terrifies me, because I know I'm not trained. And yet, the taking away that freedom of the classes to delegate whom they will. And so the thing that I was wondering about, is it possible for the officers to not be delegates, which would therefore leave the classes free to choose whom they will, and yet provide for the training and preparation?
Would you like to respond to that?
Well, I would like to respond to the idea of training. It was suggested earlier this would only involve the training of 10 people. That's not correct, of course. There are 2 slates of potential officers. That's 20 delegates if there's no overlap between president and clerk. So it's up to 20 delegates. Those delegates are not known until after all of the classes have submitted their delegations. And the delegates then have had the opportunity to review the bio and profile of each of them and identify who they would like to vote for. And so that slate of potential officers comes out not that long before Synod. And to expect someone to be able to train 20 people for the imminent election of 4 people is more complicated than what was being implied here previously.
Gerald Koning and Sherry Tanclay.
Jerry Koning, classes Georgetown. I speak against this. Earlier, we approved a parliamentarian that was going to be somebody that was going to be in close proximity to the officers, and we haven't even tried that, and it would really be nice to be able to try that and see how that affects our ability to manage Synod. I'm not really worried about if we, don't look like politicians to the outside world. And if we, after having a parliamentarian helping the officers run a meeting for a couple of synods and we still think we still suck at running meetings, then maybe we can go to this. But I think let's try that parliamentarian approach and see how we do. And I bet we'll be doing really, really well, because I don't think we're doing so bad right now.
Sherry Tanclay.
Sherry Tanclay, classes Red Mesa. I'm going to speak for the motion for the following reasons. I would invite us to take a risk. We know that if it doesn't work out, we all just fall apart, that a future Synod will come back and say, that didn't work, and they will change it. I've been in classes meetings where delegates, everyone's trying to decide who's going to go to Synod, and it's not always very pretty. I don't want to do that. And I think I have a family wedding, and I just don't see 100 people showing up saying, pick me, pick me. So I'm not so worried about that part. I have, now I can say I've been a representative to Synod. I've gone to more classes meetings than I can count, from the time where I was the only woman and had to wear a brown suit. I've been a board president. I've worked for the denomination. So I've sat in a lot of seats in this denomination. And I think that the reality is that although Synod is the final authority, it is not our day job. And we have people for whom this is their day job. So they are trying to figure out day to day how to move this thing forward. And I have heard more than once, who knows the mind of Synod? Because the gift mix and the skill set changes every year. And so even though we are the final authority, there are a lot of people who are, that is the dicey dance. We are working with people who do this every day. So I think the governance thing, we need to own what that org chart really looks like. I'd also like to speak for training, and I agree. I am, by trade, a trainer and a facilitator, and I know that training ahead is always a beneficial thing to do. It could be done well, it can be done in different kinds of ways, but I know I always feel better stepping into a job, even though I have I'm old, I have a boatload of experience, but I still always like knowing what's coming before me, and I think the training piece is really important. I would like us to pay attention to the money, because it seems like when decisions or ideas have been raised during this past week, well, it's cost too much money, so we can't do it, or it seems too complicated, so we can't do it, and it'll probably cost money. I don't want us as God's children to always hide behind that. This will cost money, you know, bringing someone to Grand Rapids or setting up a Skype account or however we do it, it will cost money. But I think we need to seriously think about the process and how beneficial it might be for us. Thank you.
The question has been called. We're ready to vote. Yes. Could we have the main motion on the screen? It's a long one. Okay, are you on your yes/no vote page? Yes is in favor. Yes is in favor of the recommendation of the task force.
IT.
Are all the votes in? Okay, the motion is defeated. We have 93 no, 73 yes.
Mr. Chair, in light of that result, we withdraw the next motion because that becomes a moot point. The next motion spoke to the change of the church order, and so we withdraw that.
Thank you.
Then, Mr. Chairman, returning to the report of the Advisory Committee, 9C, item 4, section 4, as simply one item that Synod declare this to be its response to overtures 15 through 23, and we so move.
Since there are no names in the queue, those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign.
And then our last item, that Synod dismiss the Synod Review Task Force with gratitude and with thanks for their work. It was a significant amount of work that they did, gathering information together, trying to come up with recommendations. So whether we agree with all of those recommendations or not, and there are many, many that we did, they do deserve our gratitude and our thanks.
All right, I know.
We can do it again.
You can clap again, don't worry. All right, there was support for this motion. And obviously, those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. We thank you very much for the work that you've done. And I will cede the seat to Your Highness. Thank you very much.
Please hold the crown. Okay, thank you very much. We'll be returning to Advisory Committee 4, Report 4.
Mr. Chair, sorry. Brian Tarby, Classes, Rocky Mountain.
Oh, yep.
I put my name in the queue there. I have a motion from the floor.
Okay, I see your name coming up. Okay.
Yeah, can we get the motion on the screen?
We have a proposed motion from the floor.
I move that Synod ordinarily not go longer than 6 p.m. each day. And just to speak to this motion, it may seem like a lot to end at 6. You know, maybe you think that we're losing 3 hours, but if you have dinner after 6, then actually you only lose 1 hour of time. And if you rearrange the schedule just slightly or reduce the time in the breaks, you could actually lose no time and still end in a time that would allow us to still remain human, still remain reasonable, and still remain gracious to one another. And I think that this honors the age diversity as well represented within this body, that there are some people who just simply have a hard time being up all the way until 9 and then being asked to read report after report after report and come with an informed opinion to the floor of Synod. So I think that honors those people. I do believe that we can be more effective with our time as well. You know, more time doesn't mean less effective conversation or less effective debate. I think it encourages effective conversation and debate. So I so move, Mr. Chair.
Okay, that's moved and supported. You're putting us in a very awkward position because you've asserted that it's manageable within that time. That's not demonstrated by the motion that you're giving. Earlier in this session, we passed a motion that Synod would end at a certain time frame on Thursday. And to be able to do that, to make it an extra long afternoon and to remove all opportunity for any sessions at evening would remove minimally 5 hours and potentially up to 10 hours of discussion time. That would be workable, I guess, if we started at 5 o'clock in the morning and had a 2-hour session, then broke for breakfast, et cetera, and ended at 6. But this is not the kind of motion, I think, that we can just take from the floor. This has tremendous implications. It goes all the way back to Synod's decision to move away from an approximately 10-day or 2-week Synod to a 1-week Synod. And I would judge that this is in conflict with a motion that we already adopted that outlined Synod ending no later than a certain time on Thursday. So I'm going to rule it out of order. You're welcome to challenge the chair.
Is there support for the challenge to the chair? I heard support. Chair's been challenged. If you sustain the ruling of the chair, vote aye. Aye. If opposite the same sign. The chair is sustained.
Boy, wouldn't it be nice to have a year's training to know how to deal with that? Okay, we have another motion from the floor. Lori Fieber.
Lori Fieber, classes BC Northwest. Can we have my motion on the screen? I can start reading it too.
Please.
I propose that Synod instruct the Executive Director to build into the processes of Synod formal/professional third-party mediation and restorative practice sessions as a resource available to advisory committees to utilize in circumstances like overtures or appeals in which parties are presenting opposing positions on issues coming before Synod. Grounds: the value of listening well to each other face to face as a way to gain deeper mutual understanding is one that is promoted widely in our denomination's dialogue. I heard the other day, Reformed faith that seeks understanding, from the Calvin University presentation. Parties involved in a dispute are those who are best informed to generate well-informed solutions, as they are intimately aware of the priorities, limitations, needs, values, and concerns involved. 3, in many cases, those who are in conflict with each other benefit from the assistance of a trained, neutral third party to listen well to each other, discover common values, and be creative in the generation of solutions which meet both parties' needs without the need for arbitration. And 4, as the Church deals with differences which carry more and more weight, we would do well to adopt more and more practices which help us to create a culture of working through our conflicts face to face as much as possible.
Thank you, Lori. Is there support for the motion from the floor? Discussion to the motion. We have 2 speakers, Ronald Feenstra and then Andy Hansen.
Mr. President, Ronald Feenstra, Faculty Advisor. I'm not allowed to speak in favor or against motions, but I'm trying to understand the procedure that we're going through here. It seems to me that the way things work at Synod is that if people want to make proposals, they overture Synod, those overtures go to advisory committees, those advisory committees make recommendations to Synod, those recommendations come in the reports from advisory committees, and then Synod acts. It seems to me that that would be the way to consider proposals that might be worthy.
Thank you for that advice. Next speaker, removed, Sherry.
Thinking down the road, I'm thinking I'm going to speak for this. Oh, excuse me. Sherry Tenclay, Classes Red Mesa. I'll speak for this motion because I think as I look at our near future, this would help us prepare for some of the discussions we're going to have during the next 2 synods.
Okay, we have a whole list of names coming up. Stanley Groothoff, Michael Vanderland, Steve Bootsma.
Stanley Groothoff, Classes Iacota. I'm wondering if it would be a friendly amendment to ask the Council of Delegates to look at this and bring it back next year.
Lori, this is your motion. Are you okay with that amendment to simply ask the Council of Delegates to look at this? That's a yes. So the motion on the floor is now to recommend to the COD to consider to build into the process of Synod, etc. Notice how quickly the executive director said that was a yes. He loves it when you can remove that word instruct for once. We've instructed him to do an awful lot of things. Okay, discussion. I think a whole lot of people have removed their names. That sounds like, no? Oh, you deleted the whole queue. What? On hold. Can you put it on hold for a little longer so we can have the vote? Oh. Okay, Michael. Okay, John. To the motion as it currently reads. Paul, you may speak while he's going to the mic.
I'm actually delighted that we are not going to try to put this on our executive director all by himself. But as chair of the COD, this is Paul DeVries, chair of the COD, Synod may vote however they want on this, of course, but please don't vote in favor of the motion just because you quick want to go home and figure the COD can handle it. This will be a lot of work. Please make sure that you yourselves think this is a good and worthy idea for investigation. Don't set us up to do a lot of work for something you think might just be defeated by next year's Synod. So think forward to next year's Synod and what they're going to think about this process as you consider this. So vote however you think would be best for the churches. But let's not vote just so that we can move on and let the COD mess with it and next year's Synod mess with it.
Gareth? Oh, sorry, John. Yeah, you're still standing.
John, Synod House Classes, Toronto. Mr. Chairman, I speak against this motion. What a fearful thing that we can't trust the Christians of our church, the ones that have come here after many years of faithful service and growth and Christian development, to come and resolve our differences and to get together and find a way through to the service of Christ. I find this a kind of a manipulative thing that we have to have the controls of some outside thing because we're too juvenile or too immature to handle controversy and difficult things. What happens to prayer? What happens to the idea of Christians reaching out to each other as we do at this Synod? We're going to end Synod today prayerfully. We've worshiped so well. What is this fear of some controversy, some differences of opinion? What is so crucial about any of that? I think we should be not afraid to be Synod together, to serve our Lord together, and to take on each other with differences of opinion, and to still be loving people to each other.
Gareth, then Dwayne, then Brady.
Gareth Harker, Classes Hamilton, speaking against the motion on the grounds that we have already covered this in previously adopted motions from both the Synod Review Task Force and also the abuse of power. I feel as though the things that we have already adopted as Synod this week do address some of these things. For example, the adoption of the use of native talking circles in our advisory committee meetings, as well as training on abuse of power. So I feel as though we have already addressed this. Thank you.
Okay. Dwayne, then Brady, then Kathy.
Dwayne Walhoff, Classes Heartland. I call the question, Mr. President.
Question has been called for. It's been supported. All in favor of calling the question or ceasing debate, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. That is carried. Kathy?
Kathy Smith, Faculty Advisor. I was also going to point out that one of the recommendations that the Synod did adopt from the Synod Review Task Force addresses this. So I think the purpose of it can be accomplished through that. The other thing I wanted to mention is that without having time to contemplate this much, I'm wondering, and I think it probably would require an alteration in our rules for synodical procedure in terms of which people have access to our advisory committees. So I think there are some things that we would have to look at very carefully with a motion like this. Thank you.
We are cautious about changing our rules for synodical procedure. Adam?
Adam Isinger, Classes Iacota.
I speak against the motion for the reason being we have not had a whole lot of time to consider it, in the sense of saying we're doing committee work on the floor of Synod, and we don't do committee work usually in our councils, let alone in our classes. And it seems to me we're doing a whole lot of committee work on the floor of Synod, and this is an important topic that deserves better than that. So I speak against it for that reason.
Okay. Sherry and then Nathan.
I agree. We don't do anything out of fear. Sherry Clay, Classis Red Mesa. I think that the COD could determine the difference between alignment and redundancy. There are plenty of places in our denomination where we could look at alignment versus redundancy. History is the best predictor of the future, and I look at the denomination that I was born into, the RCA, and I have heard some of the painful, contentious arguments back and forth, and I see that one thing they contemplate is going away. I don't want that to happen to us. And if we can find wise and helpful third parties who can move us through conversations, I think that'd be helpful.
Okay. Thank you, Sherry. I see that the wording on the screen is still not adjusted according to the amendment to that had been put forward. So the wording should actually read that Synod ask the COD to build into the process, or to investigate building into the process. Okay? That COD consider to build into the process. Are you working on that? Okay. As they're working on that, just to correct that, Nathan and then Jonathan.
Nate DeYoung, McCarran, Grand Rapids East. My guess is that some of this proposed recommendation comes in light of the opposing overtures of 8 and 25. I was brought into Advisory Committee 4 along with a brother from church representing a church out of Classis Eastern Canada. We sat with the committee for an hour. We talked about it. We may have laid some conflict within that committee that they had to wrestle with. I don't see that as a bad thing. And in fact, since that time, it was Friday afternoon, Friday at dinner, me and this brother, we sat for dinner, we talked. We continue to connect beyond that time. I don't see the need for restorative practice if we're willing to break bread together.
Jonathan?
Jonathan Owens, Classis Yellowstone. I did it right this time. I speak in favor of this, mostly because I think some of us here are looking at it as if this is something that's going to be everywhere in every single committee at all times, but it's not. It's a resource available to advisory committees who think that they need it. We've said that we need these kind of resources, and this is a specification of a tool that is actually quite useful. In the broadest sense of the terms, my whole dissertation is wrapped around how you get people with differences of opinion to come together under one tent and work together for the good of whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish. And, you know, things such as restorative circles do very well to accomplishing those ends in a good way. So this isn't some major change to church order or to our procedures. It's suggesting one of the very, very good tools that we have for accomplishing these things and making them available.
That brings us to the conclusion of our speaker queue. Trust that you are ready to vote. All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Aye. That has failed. We move now to Advisory Committee 4.
Mr. Chairman, we have before us first 6, and then 7, and then 8. in light of the time frame that we're working in and planes to catch, we would suggest 6, 7, 8. Let's not be late. I did. Okay, the first one, Overture 6, follow Christ in the way of peace, doing justice and bringing reconciliation to the peoples of Israel and Palestine. As our advisory committee began to work on this, we were painfully aware of some of the stresses and the struggles that have long inflicted the Middle East and situations surrounding that. And so as we begin this, as a way to acknowledge the lament of our brothers and sisters in the Lord in the Middle East, specifically Israel and Palestine, we would invite you to join in prayer together with us. And we would like to have our alternate chair, Sid Kaparis, come and lead a prayer for that.
We are not the only denomination who is burdened with this. There are many denominations who grieve the conflict in the Middle East. I'm drawing this prayer from the Mennonite Central Committee. May I lead you in that prayer. O God of life and love and peace, we witness the violence and injustice in your holy land, and our hearts break. Our hearts break for all Palestinians, for the victims of violent attacks from Israelis, for those who have endured decades of occupation and oppression, for those whose homes and olive orchards have been demolished, for those who languish in Israeli prisons and in the open-air prison of Gaza, for those without nearly enough water and electricity and medical care, for those who are refugees, long displaced from their homes. Our hearts break for the Jewish people of Israel, for the victims of violent attacks from Palestinians, for those who live with fear and insecurity, for those who relive the trauma of the Holocaust over and over. Our hearts break for the wider world, for those who are indifferent to the pain and suffering in your holy land, for those who distort or turn their eyes from truth, for those who fail to see the humanity of all your children. Heal us all, O God. Heal the broken and comfort and sorrowful. Give hope to the hopeless and courage to the fearful. Strengthen the peacemakers and reconcilers. Confront those who practice injustice and commit violence. We especially pray that weapons of war be laid down, that walls of separation and the machinery of occupation be dismantled, that prisoners be released, that demonizing of the other cease, that political leaders seek the good of all people in Palestine and Israel. We pray also for ourselves, that our eyes will be open to the ways in which our beliefs and actions have contributed to injustice and to violence. O God, whose heart breaks for the world, may your justice dwell in the land. May your righteousness abide in fruitful fields. May the effect of righteousness be quietness and trust forever. May the effect of justice be peace, enduring peace. Amen.
Thank you, Sid. It's probably because there was a short person there just before you, me, that being me. Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Okay, let's go to our recommendations. B1, that Synod grant Dr. Darren Rorda, Canadian Minister's Director, the privilege of the floor while Overture 6 is discussed.
So ruled.
Number 2, that Synod encourage the work of addressing peace in the Middle East already being done, acknowledging the awareness of injustice, and commend with thanks the work being done.
Any speakers? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. It's carried.
Number 3, that Synod with the COD recognize and encourage our staff and churches to continue to strive for increased partnership that seeks a third way between mainline and evangelical approaches and fosters increased reconciliation on all sides.
Recommendation 3 is before you. Andy DeCourt.
I speak against this motion not because I'm against increasing peace and reconciliation in Palestine and Israel, but because we have to have priorities as a denomination, and I don't think this should be a very high one because it's beyond most of our scope. And so I also see a bit of arrogance in that we are going to find this third way between the main lines, presumably aligned. Well, I won't presume, but that there's this special way that we're going to find, that our COD and staff is going to find. I speak against this.
Theo Beals.
Theo Beals, Grand Rapids Classes North. I speak in favor of the motion. Last fall, I had the opportunity to visit Israel with considerable time in the West Bank, meeting with both Israelis and Palestinians, and I was shocked. I knew about it, and it is worse than I thought. So I encourage everyone who votes against this motion to go visit and see with their own eyes. Thank you.
Thank you, Theo. Peter Zichterman, then Peter Kornilov.
Peter Zichterman, Classis, Northern Illinois. I speak in favor in terms of recognizing and encouraging our staff and churches to continue to strive for increased partnership. Our denomination has an Office of Social Justice currently working on such issues such as peace in the Middle East. I am all for encouraging their work. Thank you.
Peter Kornilov, then Rick Rhoda.
Peter Kornilov, Classis Hackensack.
I'm ambivalent about the motion, Mr. President, and mainly for the reasons of grammar, and I hate to get grammatical here. English is my second language. But it seems that in the top two lines of the motion on the screen, the COD, the Synod with the COD, I feel like we're speaking for the COD. I mean, I understand we can encourage the COD, but it seems to package two verbs with two bodies, and only one body is here right now. So I think that's a little strange to me. Maybe someone with better grammar can explain that, or if Synod can speak for the COD. And the other part is, I don't really know, I think we all have a category of what mainline approaches are, or what evangelical are. I think there's some debate in our culture about what the definitions of those are. And here we're saying that there are defined approaches within these broad definitions. So I think it's a very unclear motion to me in those two areas, and that's why I don't really know what I'm actually voting on. I think I like the spirit of it, but I think it's just a very muddy business up there. Thank you.
I can
Thank you,
speak
Peter.
to that, Mr. Chair.
Sure. Carl?
What your advisory committee did as we worked through this, gaining a lot of information that to us was surprising. We wanted to recognize, as has already been indicated, what is and has already been being done. And one of the things that already has been done is that the COD has made this statement, and we are simply piggybacking on that to make sure that we as a Synod know that. This is the exact wording from the declaration of the COD.
Rick Rhoda, then Aaron DeBoer.
Rick Rhoda, Classes Alberta South, Saskatchewan. In 2007, I was part of the synodical team that studied on the ground, and it was eye-opening. We were mandated by Synod 2006, so there is a history. And after being part of that synodical team on the ground, I fully endorse this recommendation, and I think it echoes what we saw and recommended to Synod in 2007.
Aaron, then Andrew, then Nathan.
Aaron DeBoer, Pacific Northwest. I speak against this. Frankly, I find it to be puffery, and it lacks a gospel proclamation. The only reconciliation that will happen in pagan Israel or pagan Ishmael is regeneration through faith in Christ alone.
Andy Bawalda, then Nathan DeYoung.
Andy Bawalda, Classes Quinty. I speak in favor of this motion, and I reiterate what one brother said about having been there. I just came back from there about 2 months ago, and I was shocked. Yes, I knew about it too, but how much do I know? How much do our churches know? Puffery, yes, there's a bit of that, but we have to stand up and let the world know. They need to know that we just heard brothers say pagan Israel. My pastor referred to, he said, don't call it holy, the Holy Land, because it's not that holy anymore.
Address the chair, please.
Yes. So I speak in favor. We need to reinforce the whole notion of justice for Palestinian, especially the Palestinian Christians that are there. Thank you.
Nathan, then Tyler, then Brady.
I'd like to call the question.
The question has been called for. It's been supported. All in favor of ceasing debate, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. That's carried. We have 4 speakers on the queue, 3 speakers on the queue after. Tyler?
Mr. Chairman, Tyler Wagenmaker, Classes Zeal, and I speak against this proposal. A couple reasons. One, we have been encouraging the past few synods to, as a denomination, have a smaller footprint. This is a big problem. It's a very big problem encompassing has been the world has been dealing with, the best resources of the world for decades now. It would take a substantial amount of resources to even begin to make a dent. We're reshaping ministry shares. We're questioning again the allocation of monies. More and more congregations are saying with the limited resources we have, we're needing to do ministry on the ground around us. And this place is far away. Again, it also calls into question matters of why this issue. We have many pressing issues with issues of abuse of power and reconciliation that needs to take place, Mr. Chairman, in our own communities and in some of our own indigenous groups here. I would say that this is a wrong direction to go in, and it will only continue to absorb us in ways that distract us from other things where we can make a more substantial difference.
Jan Hirspink and then John Tenaienhuis.
I will admit that Jan Hirspink, Classes Grand Rapids South. One trip to Israel does not make me an expert. But with tour guides who are Palestinian Christians, who talked privately about how they are living and oppressed, I became very sensitive, at least, not an expert, but sensitive. When their water is cut off, simply because the Israelis can do that, when they have no vote, we must pay attention, and silence is complicit.
John?
I kind of think about an approach towards these things by way of the word approximation as opposed to perfection. If I think of the hassles and the horrors in the Sudan or in Somalia or among Canada's indigenous people, how they've been treated for the last many hundreds of years, we're just that tsunami of human horror everywhere. And what could we possibly say or do? But as I said, I buy approximations. The truth is, of course, there are so many Christian efforts that support Israel unconditionally and in every way. So in some sense, we are attached to this issue a little more strongly, even though it's just a small part of the world with a small piece of its populations. But it seems to me something needs to be said by Christians who don't buy into this idea that the powerful get to own the show. And I think in our own understanding of abuse of power and the use of power, I think we could say something. It's an approximation, it's small. But to say nothing at all when Christian brothers and sisters in Palestine are wounded for 5 decades now, that's inexcusable. They are sisters and brothers in the Lord who ask us to be sympathetic. So I suggest that we say something. This is something to say. It's an approximation. It's not perfection. And I suggest we might add the word prayerful in there somehow so that we at least know that we're praying for them, that there's a brokenness that is so deep and will not be, until our Lord returns, will not be healed, it seems. But to say nothing or to say this is too big for us, we don't want to bother, that isn't right. And I think we should be concerned about the Sudan and Somalia and indigenous people of Canada and the racial mess that we make for ourselves in North America. But it seems to me we ought to say something, and it ought to encourage us to do something, to be thinking more widely than our own small and comfortable lives here in North America.
There are no further speakers in the queue. The motion is before you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. That's carried.
Number 4, that Synod not accede to Overture 6 for the grounds listed there.
Recommendation 4, discussion to the motion. Tom Wolters.
Tom Wolters, class of Central Plains. Much of the discussion has already happened, but the ground here, I speak against this motion and to accede to the overture. The final ground statement there about the issue of ecclesiastical matters has been tossed around in a lot of discussions to limit the church's prophetic voice. And I think that is wrong. I think we do need to speak prophetically as a church, and that is an ecclesiastical matter. So I speak against this motion and in favor of the overture.
Other speakers? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That's carried. Before we move on to the next, let's just take a moment to pause and silently pray for that situation. Just at your table, just quiet your heart and pray for peace, pray for shalom, pray for God's mercy. Hear our prayers, O Lord. Amen.
Recommendation number 5, that Synod declare this as our response to Overture 6.
There are no speakers. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. It's carried.
Then we move on to number 2.
No, I'm going to suggest that rather than getting into the discussion on kinism, it's 5 minutes to break time. I'm going to suggest we start our break 5 minutes early, and that'll just be that much of an extra incentive to be back on time. So let's be back here at 10 o'clock. Please be reminded when we return, we will be in executive session. Steve, you have an announcement before people run for the coffee?
Yes, just a reminder, since the chair has said we'll be going into executive session after the break, just a reminder of our rules. Those to be here are the delegates, the staff consultants, so those were the staff folks assigned to the various advisory committees. Also, the seminary advisors, and we extend that definition to include the president of the seminary, the president and one other member of the Council of Delegates, so it's the chair and the vice chair, and ecumenical delegates who represent our relationships that are labeled ecclesiastical fellowship. And I believe, Mr. Chair, those are those who should stay in executive session after the break.
With those guidelines, please be back here at 10 o'clock.